Hello. It's a pleasure to be speaking with the good people of the world. Hopefully you're out there. It's sort of hard to tell when you're on this side of the camera. It's the last day of November 2017. Tomorrow we're moving into December. And as always in these videos, we're talking about the dynamics, the seasons, the cycles, the times. And we're focusing around the lunar cycle in this video, particularly on a full moon in Gemini approaching this Sunday, December 3rd, 2017. And so we're going to do an experiment today and see if it's possible for me to convey the astrology despite what the astrology is. And so, where to even begin? I suppose we'll just begin right with this full moon, since it's coming up and there's a lot happening simultaneously. The full moon in Gemini, every December time, every June time, we deal with the Gemini-Sagittarius polarity. These two signs are opposite one another. And so a couple weeks ago, the sun entered Sagittarius, and in a few days, or actually tomorrow, December 1st, Venus enters Sagittarius. And so Sagittarius is the sign of exploration, expansion. We are exploring our truth. We are discovering our philosophy through going out into nature, getting in touch with the natural, universal principles, and exploring the diversity of cultures and philosophies that can be out there, or getting deeper in touch with our own personal truth and philosophy. And the full moon in Gemini, Gemini gets the characteristics for being what? For being humorous, witty, very intellectual. Gemini is the left brain, logical, breaking down and discerning the surrounding environment into bits and pieces of information in order to label, dissect, and understand our surrounding world and be able to communicate and express these ideas. Whereas Sagittarius is the right brain, intuitive, big picture perspective, as if life itself were a topographical map, and being in tune in the vast, brush strokes, broad brush strokes, understanding of what's beneath the surface, what life is all about, in that deep, vast, adventure-like, and full of purpose and meaning type of understanding. So there's your polarity. And again, every December, every June, there's a full moon, either in Gemini or Sag, that brings up this polarity. And there can be reverberation, there can be dividing. Of course, the stereotype for these full moons is debate and arguing and philosophizing. And the full moon in Gemini, again, Gemini usually gets this stereotype of being lighthearted, very witty, very humorous, able to use words in a very witty and spontaneous jugglery type of way, as I convey in these videos, and I even have the magical Gemini hands that all Geminis are renowned for. And yet, this is not your stereotypical full moon in Gemini, because on the very same day, the ruler of Gemini, which of course is the Lord of communication, the divine message deliverer, the mailman of the gods, Mercury himself, who is stationing at the final degree of Sagittarius conjunct Saturn, square to Chiron. And so you're typically witty, spontaneous, playful, not so much being this full moon, with the Mercury Retrograde conjunct Saturn simultaneously. Mercury conjunct Saturn is like the thinker. It is serious, it is scrutinizing, it is contemplative, and automatically the eyebrows on the face of any Gemini is like this. There is a heaviness here. There is a scrutinizing, getting down to business, and figuring things out in the most discerning, logical, even negative type of thinking process. Saturn is like the planet of negativity, for better or worse. And this can be, logic through negational logic. What I don't have, what's not here, what I can't do. Again, this can be very heavy and stressful, particularly on our minds. And for your Gemini friends, those with Gemini stellium, South Node in Gemini, on the ascendant, so on and so forth, remember to breathe. Remember to breathe. And we've got to go with the flow a little bit, even with this scrutinizing, and it can be enormously disorienting. It can be enormously confusing, because not only is Mercury stationed on Saturn on the day of this full moon is also square to Neptune to the degree. And so it's as if our souls want to expand, want to step into unexplored territory. This is Sagittarius. This is the Sun in Sag, square to Neptune on the 3rd. And there is this exploring and yet not totally knowing where things are going. Our soul wants to move forward into the new, and yet it's not conceptually understood where this is going. And Mercury wants to know what's going on. He's down there with Saturn being just like, let's measure, let's figure things out, let's make these things work. And yet this Mercury retrograde, beginning on the 3rd and going all the way till the end of December, the 23rd of December, Mercury will station again at 13 degrees Sagittarius, square to Neptune and trine the moon's north node. This Mercury retrograde beginning on the 3rd can initiate with more questions than answers, which is typical for your Mercury retrograde beginning, stationing retrograde. You know, things get off track. This is the stereotype with Mercury retrograde is, oh, technology goes wrong. Don't buy your new computer. Don't go on a plane ride, so on and so forth, which is a huge amount of superstition and anxiety that we have to sort of take with a grain of salt, of course, because Mercury is retrograde approximately a quarter of every year. So no, we can't just put our life on halt and wait for Mercury to pass over each and every time he turns retrograde. And yet there is something to be said about things not always working the way that we want to. Because Mercury is our logical, discernible, rational, scheduling processes, mechanical nature, how things are supposed to work. And Mercury really wants to figure out how things are supposed to work, particularly conjunct Saturn. And yet, things are getting off track, you know. It's like a DJ where there's, you know, the needle in the groove and, you know, it goes, and things get mixed up. This is Mercury retrograde. And so the key with any Mercury retrograde is flexibility, patience, going with the flow. And when things do not work, it's about finding the alternative paths, you know. It's not like, oh, there's something wrong with my computer, and so I need to wait for later. No, it's like there's something wrong with the computer. Maybe you're supposed to take that thing in a different direction, communicate it in a different way. Or maybe you were going to travel by bus, and you're supposed to travel by plane. That's the flexibility that's really required with Mercury retrograde. And yet, with him stationed on Saturn right now, there can be an unbelievable amount of force with our thinking, with how things are supposed to happen, and we need to be sure that we are not forcing a square peg through a round hole. Particularly these next couple weeks, as Mars is also approaching an opposition with Uranus. This is taking place tomorrow, December 1st, before Mars moves into Scorpio on December 9th. And so, this next couple weeks, I should say this next week, Mars is still opposite to Uranus, and this can create a tremendous amount of restlessness. Mars opposite to Uranus could be one of the most restless transits that there is. And our energy, our physical willpower, what we want to do can be very, very wound up. And again, the challenge and the danger of this transit is trying to fit a square peg through a round hole, because there can be enormous amounts of frustration coming out of a sense of claustrophobia or not being able to actualize what we freely want to do as individuals. Mercury conjunct Saturn can be the schedule doesn't permit it. There's not enough time. There's not enough resources. There's not enough space. And this can be the trap of Gemini thinking. is when we have a brick wall in front of us, it's all that we see. And that Gemini logic can be sort of like a rat in a rat maze where there doesn't seem to be any way out, and there is not that big picture topographical map perspective to see the way out of the maze. There's only the wall that's in front of us, and that can be met with a certain amount of frustration. And so Saturn conjunct Mercury can say, I can't. It can't work. I'm not good enough. This video is not good enough. The way I communicate is not understood. And we have to have a huge amount of flexibility and forgiveness for ourselves, a huge amount of flexibility and forgiveness of others as they go through their philosophizing, communication, trying to figure each other out right now is not easy. My number one recommendation for this full moon is to stay off of Facebook. It's a real struggle for myself personally, being so Pisces. I get lost and I get influenced and I get my feelings hurt and all of this crazy, ridiculous bullshit that's not even very much real half the time. And so I really have been lately trying to pull my ethereal tentacles out of Facebook, and I do recommend this generally because this is a time, again, the Sagittarius Gemini polarity can bring up argument and philosophizing, and it's whose way is right, whose philosophy is the correct one, who's seeing it from the correct perspective. And it's just like, if we try to force other people to understand us right now, we're going to be met with an awful lot of disappointment. And so we don't have to set ourselves up for disappointment right now. Mercury retrograde can be incubating, very, very introverted, particularly conjunct Saturn. Again, be the thinker a little bit, you know? Take your own introverted exploration inside, because this incubatory, introverted processing and scrutinizing, we do have to use this. I'm not saying don't be thinking intensely. We're all thinking intensely, but it's a self-reflective processing type of time. And we can be reflecting on an awful lot right now, because Saturn is on his way out of Sagittarius this month. At the end of the month, he's going to move into Capricorn, joined with the Sun and Venus. And January is going to be a very, very Saturn-Capricorn-centric time period. And so we're in between Saturn cycles right now. And Saturn is pushing through the final degree of Sagittarius these next weeks. And as he does so, and as Mercury does his retrograde simultaneously, there can be a reflection on the prior 2.5 years, you know, looking back to 2015, 2016, 2017. What's been going on these years with Saturn in Sagittarius? He also squared Neptune through these years. Has been a significant amount of scrutiny on our own philosophies, on our truth, on our religion, on our goals, on our sense of what gives us that deeper purpose and meaning. And in many respects, it's been going through the mill the last couple years. And those mutable signs out there, you know, your Gemini, Virgo, Sag, Pisces people, your poets, your teachers, your dreamers, your spiritual aspirants could have been going through a bit of a challenging time where the typical angels and fairies and intuitions feel a little bit more suppressed, as Saturn is the planet of limitation, closes that window to the heavens. But in so doing, it's been a period of scrutinizing, is this real? Is this grounded? Does this affect myself, my world, and others in a healthy, practical way? Is this truth oriented with nature? Does it actually work? And so, again, there's a lot of scrutiny and processing, and is this the truth? Is this my direction? Are these the people I'm meant to be with? Is this the work that I'm meant to be doing? Am I in the right place? Am I the right person? Who am I? And it goes deep. It goes deep. And so part of this Mercury retrograde is allowing this process to take us deep, allow us to go inside. And we don't have to have everything figured out. This is sort of an opening up. And there's the balance between Gemini and Sag, and integrating that Neptune square. It's like we have to balance out in opposite directions depending on where our propensities may be. For example, if you're naturally very Gemini, logical, scientific, I like institutional educational settings, I like to have facts, I like to have them proven, I like to know what's real, then maybe it's about balancing out with Sag, which is just sort of chilling out and allowing that intuitive big picture to come naturally. And of course the key that we keep coming back to in terms of not arguing, not getting on Facebook, not getting into disputes, it's also listening. We're listening to the other person. Gemini is the sign of diversity. Gemini is the sign where we learn that every single person has a completely unique experience, perspective, and therefore truth. And to say that any one truth is the right way or the wrong way is to get further away from the multidimensional reality in which we live. So listening, either way, is the key here. But it's like if we're super logical, maybe it's a time to open up. Maybe it's a time to get into nature, just chill. Listen to these truths that other people are saying about the big picture perspective. And it's simply about being receptive. That Mercury scrutinizing with Saturn is going to continue, but it's like unwinding. It's like we don't have to grab onto the mental process. We can just sort of witness it from an objective state. And that's important for the Mercury tribe because, again, it's like we're in the rat maze looking at a brick wall that can be very depressing. It can be very hard and challenging and frustrating, and it's not that you have to have everything figured out. You don't have to be at the end of the maze right now. Similarly, if you're a typically very Sagittarius person, this is the one way. All is love. God is one. Jesus is the Lord. All things are a part of the earth. You know, it's a very broad, intuitive, big picture perspective. And Sages are the natural spiritual teachers in certain respects because they do have that intuitive, big picture perspective. And yet, Gemini exists. There is a diversity of perspectives. And there is such a thing as science and what logically works and what is actually tangibly practical. And are these big lofty goals and ideals actually serving you? Do they allow you to connect with other people in a way that is understandable, in a way that creates a sense of love, family, community, working together, aspiring towards greater things? Is there that actual functioning, working, practically beneficial sense? Yes? And the Gemini-Sag polarity goes back and forth between the left brain, the right brain, what's right in front of us, the big picture perspective. And this is how we form that bridge between the left and the right brain. That natural reverberation can help us to sort of loosen wherever we might be overly attached and expand into new possibilities. And again, this is not coming served to us on a silver platter, the answers, the solutions, the keys, you know. I'm going to see the astrologer. They're going to give me the one-word solution to solving the rest of my life. You know, we're all on a lifelong journey of healing and growing here. This is all about a continued exploration. And so, it's important to be flexible, to be forgiving, because with the full moon in Gemini, Mercury retrograde, and Mars opposite to Uranus, this can be also information overload. Or so much to do in so many different little bubbles. Like Gemini is diversity. It's like I've got my home life, my work life, the friends, the organization that I'm leading, the church group, the children's club, the Boy Scouts, whatever. And it's just like information overload. I have to manage this, I have to do this, and it's just like, we have to settle down. We have to be forgiving. We have to be flexible because this can also be nervous breakdowns. This can be nervous system overload. This is not the time to be slamming so much coffee, not so much the time to be pushing yourself beyond your limit, because that will lead to that explosion that can come out of the frustration that things aren't going the way we want them to, that we're not being understood by the people we would wish to be understood by. And we can feel that isolation, we can feel that frustration, and then the reaction of Mars versus Uranus is just to take to the hills, you know. Find yourself halfway driven to Las Vegas before waking up and realizing what the heck's going on. Oh, wow, I just booked it. I just totally abandon everything, you know. This is Uranus, the rebel, you know. The opportunity and the challenge with Mars opposite to Uranus is integrating our instinct with innovation. And that's a wild stallion to harness in itself, isn't it, right? It's like we have these gut instincts that are being just like, don't want to stick around here anymore, don't want to be imprisoned in this cycle anymore, don't want to keep meeting this redundant wall anymore. And it is, again, we have to experiment through trial and error and be very forgiving of self and the other as we explore and find the creative solutions that may not even come without making a million mistakes first. So Uranus is the innovator, the pioneer, and any innovator and pioneer will tell you that they had to make a million mistakes first before they had that one brilliant eureka moment creative discovery. Similarly, we have to be experimental, we have to be forgiving, and we are learning through trial and error how to integrate our own fullest, genius, eccentric, innovative nature with what we are doing with others. Mars is still in Libra, figuring out what are we doing with other people? How are we collaborating? That's like this next week through December 9th is really mastering what am I doing, what are we sharing, what are we collaborating, and then Mars moves into Scorpio for around the next couple months. And that's when things get deep and real and we're getting in touch with our desires and the unconsciousness. And so, of course, relationship themes aren't finished yet, just because Venus is moving into Sag. Venus is moving into Sag tomorrow on the 1st and then forming a square with Neptune on December 10th. In our relationships, we're going to want to open up. We want expansiveness. We want the feelings that we can explore and that we can go on our spiritual journey together and we can have that sense of shared mutual philosophy and truth and having those people behind us that are providing that sense of purpose and meaning and supporting us. And so there's this desire to open and explore, and then simultaneously that Mars-Uranus is just like, yeah, but I want to be free. I want to be liberated simultaneously. And so we've got a whole boatload of some important asteroid aspects going on these couple weeks too, with the first 4 main asteroids. The asteroids to be discovered in the early 1800s are sort of, the way I see them, a little more integrated, a little more powerful, and they're all making potent aspects these next couple weeks. In terms of relationships, we've got asteroid Juno, the partnership asteroid, square to Mars a couple days ago, November 28th, square to Uranus December 3rd, and square to asteroid Palisthena on December 5th. This can create a huge amount of tension between our relationships and the need for independence, innovation, creative freedom, to explore, to have our own cycles, our own rhythms. And yet Juno is here in Capricorn, saying, how are we going to function? How are we going to work? And so this creates a conflict between our independence needs and our relationship needs. And it's a conflict that invites, like we said with Uranus, creative solutions that have to be explored through trial and error in terms of how we can integrate our genius, our innovativeness, our creativity, mental brilliance, which is Palisthena, conjoined Uranus and Aries. We have Palisthena joined with Uranus this whole next month. Pallas is stationed on Uranus. Palisthena is the goddess of wisdom. She is the goddess of creative, intuitive genius. The type of genius that you see, you perceive it. Wherever Palisthena is in your birth chart is the genius that's so intuitive, it's like a perceptive, creative vision. All right? Conjunct Uranus is this innovative. What can we invent? What can we create in order to bring the future into the present? And Pallas in Aries is going to the beat of her own drum, finding out how to reinvent herself in order to be the most brilliant and unique and capable being that we can be. And so that Pallas Uranus square to Juno is how do we find creative solutions to integrate that genius, that independence? You know, it's like I think of Einstein riding his bicycle in circles, right? He was a genius, and he was an eccentric, and this is Uranus. He was bridging the future with the present, and it's like we've all got these quirky things we need to do to tap into that sense of freedom, and yet we don't want to ride our bike in circles when there's anybody else in the room, you know? The same way that we have a hard time singing what we love to sing in the shower when nobody's around, when there's a group of people surrounding us. And so that's the challenge, but the potential is, how can we sing that song that we would typically sing in the shower if no one's looking? How do we get that confidence when people are around? And we need support. We need to communicate what we want to share. And that's all a part of this highly experimental, innovative time. What groups are you participating in? Where can you find that creative outlet? You know, Mercury conjunct Saturn is that negating reduceful logic. I don't have this. I don't get this from my partner. I don't get this from my friend. I don't get this from my work. Okay. Without getting trapped in the reductionist logic, where is that negation opening up space for us to go somewhere different? Again, trial and error, flexibility with Mercury retrograde. If things aren't working one way, slowly back up and explore another way. If that doesn't work, try another path, and eventually we find our way to the top or wherever we're trying to go. And so, this is about finding that creativity. I want to bring Sarys into this because Sarys is conjunct the north node of the moon this entire next month and January. Sarys is stationed conjunct the north node of the moon before she comes back in April of 2018. Sarys was the first asteroid to be discovered. She's the mother asteroid, the principle of nurturance. Sarys was a Mother Earth type of figure, you know, ruling the seasons, agriculture, plant life, so on and so forth. And in the birth chart, she's the principle of nurturance and nourishment. How we receive that nurturance, how we give it to others. And on the North Node in Leo, there's this invitation to figure out how to nurture and nourish our inner child. That is the curriculum, that is the jet fuel. That's not coming to us easy because that's the soul evolutionary work right now. And yet that Sarys is holding open the doorway to our future growth. How can we get to that sense of being the playful, innocent child amidst the heaviness, amidst the distractions, amidst the arguments? How can we create a spaciousness for ourselves that makes us feel creatively excited, full of life? That we feel safe enough, and the key word is safety, the key word is flexibility, to be able to spontaneously radiate our inner creative sexual nature, our inner warmth, our inner playfulness. That inner child dynamic can very much be integrated, and this is definitely a part of the Sagittarius season as well. You know, so many people get excited for Christmas time, being a part of this Jupiterian Sagittarius gifts beneath the tree. It's this inner child dynamic as well. How can we evoke that magicalness? And fortunately, this is a time where we can integrate the magic. As Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, ruling over the sun now, soon to rule over Venus when she moves into Sag tomorrow. Jupiter is in a trine to Neptune. That's exact on December 2nd, and then Jupiter is approaching asteroid Vesta, December 12th. Well, Vesta is the asteroid of devotional service. Asteroid Vesta, the glyph of Vesta, is the eternal flame, of which in the temple of Vesta during the Roman time there was always an eternal flame. And the Vestal Virgins, the high priestess of that time, had a very prestigious place in the Roman hierarchy, but also a lot of responsibility to keep that flame always going, to be very chaste. They were highly meticulous and focused in their healing rituals and procedures that were also extremely effective. And these were your natural oracles, your natural intuitive healers, sexual healers, so on and so forth. So Jupiter trine to Neptune, coming up to that Vesta, is magical. We can really focus on what's going beneath the surface, that ethereal, mystical Scorpio nature. You know, these are symbols, these are archetypes, these are the deep building blocks of nature and how to use them in such a way to transform your life and others' lives. And as Jupiter approaches Vesta, there can be a dedication to finding that deep truth. What are the symbols? What are the archetypes that we work with, that we use in order to catalyze change in our own and others' lives, and in order to feel empowered, in order to actually transform the level of our own consciousness? So Jupiter can be vastly intuiting, really plugging into the big, big picture, the big, big ocean beneath the surface of the water. This is like the deep ocean. Jupiter in Scorpio trying to Neptune. And so, you sensitive spiritual souls, in your meditations, you can be plugged in. There's so many realizations, so many eureka moments coming from a very deep part of ourself going on this next month. And the key with the full moon square to Neptune, Mercury square to Neptune at the end of the month, is being flexible and receptive enough to open up like a flower to the sun, to receive that information without trying to grab it, without trying to grasp it, without trying to figure things out, without trying to grasp the other or figure the other person out. It is okay if we are all somewhat of an enigma to each other, or if we feel that we're on the other side of some vaster distances. Use that sense of isolation, should that be an experience, to introvert. Explore your own inner universe. See what's going on the inside. What are those symbols? What is that meaning for you? And then this can come full circle and become a part of our truth and philosophy, which is evolving, which is changing throughout this month in order to integrate our freedom with our committance to others, our truth with what we're doing in the world, and how we can express ourselves in a way that brings more meaning and sense of purpose in our lives. And so I will conclude today by actually reading the Sabian symbol for this full moon, which rounds up to 12 degrees Gemini. The Sabian symbol reads, "A black slave girl demands the rights of her mistress." Again, argument, whose truth is right, what is ethical, what is true, the questioning of these things. And Dane Rudhyar writes about this Sabian symbol. This can be the will to rise above conditioning. Mercury stationed on our Saturn right now, we can be taking a clear and deep look at our conditioning. What programming has limited us to a limited self-identity, a limited scope of expression in terms of reaching other people, or a limited sense of what is right or what is permissible in terms of our truth, religion, or philosophy. And so there is the opportunity, Mars opposite to Uranus, to rebel, to break away from the old limiting patterns in terms of how we've related, connected to others, and in terms of how we've used our own energy and physical willpower, is Mars opposite to Uranus. And again, it's about integrating our instincts, our drive, our willpower and energy with our innovativeness, what the future can be, that's freed, that's liberated, that's beyond the stupid, superficial, man-made garbage found in our culture, found in nature. Like how since Jupiter's moved into Scorpio, there's been all these sexual scandals coming to the surface. Why? Because we're freaking sick of this old cultural garbage. And just a heads up, this is going to keep happening through the next several years. More and more cultural garbage, such as slavery just 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, but really 50 years ago, and still slavery, prejudice against other races, other ethnicities. When are we going to rise above this cultural garbage? And so we can be witnessing this in ourselves, and it's important to be forgiving and flexible with ourselves. We've all been conditioned. We've all been raised by parents who were raised by their own parents, who may have been immigrants coming from other countries, surviving famines and disease and whatnot. It's been a dog-eat-dog, fight-to-survive world for thousands and thousands of years, and men and women have done the best that they could at the time. And yet we continue to evolve. And so it's not blaming our parents for fucking us up, but it's recognizing that there are qualities in how we were conditioned that's not accurate in terms of who we are, and is not a healthy way of living our lives or interacting with other people, other sexes, so on and so forth. So we can be looking at this conditioning. We can be looking at what limits us. And there can be this evocation of how can we start to move through, break through of these things. Dane Rudyard also writes, it can also be a sensation that there's a need to conform. Mercury conjunct Saturn's like, it's too much. I can't do it. I don't have enough resources. I don't have enough energy. And while it's important that we are always oriented towards moving forward and we're not giving up and downward spiraling into hopelessness, which can really, really drag us down and get us stuck, it's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater either. Saturn is not something that we ever transcend, like, oh, that voice of Saturn is gone, I never have doubts, I never think negatively. These are useful, practical skills to have as well. And so there is a level of acceptance, this is the pace that I can go. This is what I'm capable of giving at this time. And so while I think it's important not to conform to such a thing such as slavery, it's also important that we're not trying to force a square peg through a round hole. Like Sagittarius can see the big, big picture and we just want to get back to the perfect, ideal world. And it's about being okay with little baby steps at a time, but making sure that we are moving forward. Because this is an energy that we will take forward. Saturn's moving from Sag into Capricorn and will be in Capricorn for the next 2.5 years, which is a majorly building and constructing time. So we're getting ready to go to work in a very deep, big picture, collective perspective. This is what humanity's doing. And these breakthrough, these realizations, the taking time to self-reflect, to introvert, and to intuit where we're going, where our truth is taking us, going on into the future. Again, there can be an orientation that's almost like a preparation for the work that we're going to be doing in 2018, 2019, 2020. It can be also like, what are we stepping up into? What is this role? And again, how do we bring the God-given uniqueness that we are? North Node and Sarys and Leo. What is awesome about us? Celebrate your divine child. Throw a huge birthday party for yourself this year. Play, be spontaneous, wear a different hat. Dress up in a different job every day, like how a kid can grow up and be something different every day. That creative, innovative brilliance of the inner child is one and the same with our inner sage guru. And so integrating that innovativeness, that uniqueness, that individuality with our relationships, with our work in the world, with our role in the public eye is somewhat preparing us for the future work that we can be doing as we see and we address the conditionings, the situations in our lives and in the world, and don't get hyper-identified with the brick wall in front of us, but understand that this is all a part of the seasons, the cycles, the breathing in and out of life and nature. And so, we'll all keep our chins up these next couple weeks, and as always, it's a huge honor and a pleasure to do this work, to be your personal mailman, as this Gemini is, and I wish you absolutely the best for yourself, for your beloveds, in all of your future endeavors.